Hello, my name is Yatha, and welcome to my personal channel. And today I am going to be studying for my a class I have in because I am a college student. Believe it or not, I'm not just a random person who yaps on the internet. No one listens to me. It's fine. But I'm just gonna be reading my notes for a class called Environmental Impact Assessment. It is a class where I essentially go through the governmental process that is involved with environmental review, how it's supposed to work, also some changes that's been happening more recently that my professor has mentioned. And I have a test on Wednesday for this class because I'm also taking a summer abroad portion, and I'm just going to be reading. I'm reading through my notes partially just because I think it's cool, but also to study, read through them, ask myself questions, write down the questions, ask them in class tomorrow, do all the fun stuff that goes in line with actually studying for a class. This is the first time in a while where I've really tried and to research and understand material for a class since honestly potentially AP classes that I took in high school. So, if you are interested in environmental impact assessment, this might be an interesting video while I also study for it simultaneously. I have Minecraft footage in the background just for your Zoomer brain. But let's get started. And this is coming from the NEPA guide handbook. I don't have it right around me. Actually, I probably should, but I'll get it if it pops up. I'm not going to use it for this YouTube video, so that's irrelevant for this case. But I might need it for my own purposes later. And I actually read the textbook or the NEPA book. I actually read it. I never read the book. So this is interesting. But chapter 1, this is just I guess, an overview chapter. NEPA, which is the National Environmental Policy Act, creates a national policy balancing the harmony between humans and the environment, promoting efforts that help the environment and the biosphere itself, alongside our understanding, and creating the CEQ. And the CEQ is the Council of Environmental Quality. This was passed in 1970 by Nixon. It has 6 fundamental objectives, adding that supplemental legal authority, procedural reform guiding what decisions agencies make. So it's guiding agencies, not necessarily an objective metric, which is what I said before with supplemental legal authority. It's not an exact law. Disclosure of environmental information, treating environmental concerns on par with economic, social, etc. So this is essentially making agencies and decision makers think of environmental consequences as the same as economic consequences, social consequences, etc. Resolution of environmental problems using the above disclosure to search for a solution. So when they disclose it to this information, theoretically how this is supposed to work is that you have some agencies, you tell them they are more motivated to search for information, and they use this above information that I just mentioned to disclose as resolution of environmental problems. This fostering intergovernmental coordination, having agencies work together, doing that, and finally the 6th one, enhancing public participation and opinion. So this is another big one. Actually, this is something interesting about the just NEPA as a law. A lot of the times, environmental policy making in the U.S. politics wasn't really ever considered unless some big thing happened. Obviously, this is people barely knew what climate change even was at the time, and I don't know if the Exxon climate scientists, if they found, I don't know what year they found out. If it hadn't happened yet, it was pretty soon. I'm pretty sure it was in the 70s, but this was passed in 1970. So I don't think it happened yet. But it was oh, a river just set on fire, or there's this massive smog above our city. That's the only time people ever really care about the environment. And you compare that to now, and there's everyone knows about the environment. So this is, even though yeah, climate change is definitely real. Don't even question me on that. But it's that's just a proven fact. Even though everyone knows that, you don't really see it unless you're actively looking at the data, and we only know that data because we're looking at the data. So I do appreciate this law actually, because it's talking about the disclosure of information that the government has tried to consider and talk it to the people, which is that's good. That's good. it gives the outlet for like us to be able to understand what climate change is, for example, in a modern context 50 years later. So I think, even though I'm just kind of applying this as something that is interesting to me today, is I think without this law, things like climate change and a lot of like other biodiversity and like a lot of ecological problems that we face today, or we wouldn't know them as well. So that's pretty fun. I think this law is actually really, even though it doesn't have a strict like procedural impact, is only more so supplemental. Well, no, it is a procedural impact. It doesn't have like objective impact. It's not like, oh, you can't do this. It's just more you look into this and disclose the information. But even then, disclosing information is really important, and it does increase the democratic process and let people know, and that makes people care. So that's definitely important. I think it's fun. Um, Federal agencies must create an EIS, environmental impact statement, for actions significantly affecting the quality of the environment. And this is just part of the disclosure I just talked about. The CEQ was created specifically to administer NEPA. And so this was part of NEPA. NEPA is, again, the law. The CEQ was the council that, I guess, makes the agencies administer, or makes the agencies disclose the information that they need to be discovering here, that they need to be disclosing. Yeah. So it's like the law, the NEPA is just a law. CEQ is the people who enforce the law. Again, the law is just in a procedural process. It's not like a you have to follow these standards process. It's different. It's a consideration process. It's an analysis process. That's what the law is. Alongside NEPA, in 1970, Congress also passed the creation of the EPA, aiding federal agencies with the NEPA process. So the EPA, so this is the difference. You probably have heard of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. It's a department directly related to the federal branch of the government, and they're basically, so the CEQ is a council of environmental quality, while the EPA is the like agency that so alongside also patent creation. Okay. So the council is the authorizing figure, and EPA is I guess the creation. They're the people who aid the federal agency. So there's the administrative figure and then the helping branch. Make sense? Cool. Before NEPA, agencies could not consider the environment, and actions were not disclosed. Would only react to environmental problems after they occurred. And this is what I was saying before. We're only like when a river was set on fire, there's a big cloud above your city, smog. Some EIS outline or environmental impact statement outlines environmental impacts. That's something that you have to consider. Unavoidable environmental effects. So, I don't know, the river burning. Potential alternatives that you could take: short term versus long term. Anything irreversible. And that's the outlines. Anything irreversible. So NEPA often instead implements an environmental assessment and or a FONSI, or a finding of no significant impact. And the reason they do this is because an EIS is really difficult to implement. It's like has a lot of time, a lot of research, and a lot of times it is not necessary. It is a bureaucratic waste of time, which is something a lot of conservatives like to point out about the environmental process, how it needs to be a lot more efficient, which is not entirely wrong. And this is what they're referencing here. And that they actually do try to speed up the process, which it's fine to do if you're just doing the same thing over and over again. After the law's passing, the Supreme Court decided that NEPA is a procedural case. So this is when NEPA was first passed. People weren't certain if it was a strict guideline that you have to do, or a strict law that you have to follow, or is this more of an aiding authority of precedent more? And that's what the Supreme Court cases ended up suggesting that. And it being a procedural requirement without substantive directives. This is what I'm talking about with all this time of like, oh, it's only like a suggestion. It is a procedural requirement So it's something you have to do, but without substantive directive. So it's not like you have to like, oh, I have to have this many parts per million of, or restrict this many parts per million of CO2 into the atmosphere. It doesn't have that. That's something like the Clean Air Act would do that. But not NEPA. Not NEPA. And after these cases, environmental assessments with FONSIs, again, findings of no significant impact, became a thing. So, and these court cases started, I guess, making this a big deal of requirement. Agencies may try to meet NEPA in three. I do not know what I wrote down. Local? Three something. Wait, I don't know what I wrote down there. But yeah, agencies might try to meet the NEPA requirements in three broad. That's what I said. Three broad ways. Bare. Okay, I see what I said. They might try to do it just by doing the bare legal minimum and just checking the boxes. They might try to do it in good practice, so faithfully abide by what it wants it to do. And then the overkill being like so much documentation that they will avoid any legal challenges because no one wants to read what they wrote. Obviously try for good practice because that's the middle ground. While NEPA legally only applies to federal agencies, third parties can participate, such as local governments, Native American tribes, contractors, consultants, interest groups, and interested citizens. So even you watching this video right now, I don't know if you've gotten this far, but that'd be cool. You can go and start talk in the NEPA. Even right now with all the crap going on in the government, NEPA still exists, so hasn't gone away yet. The CEQ and the EPA, so again, Council of Environmental Quality and the Environmental Protection Agency, are responsible for administering NEPA, as I said before. And this is going into the... Again, I mentioned that the CEQ is the administrating figure, and the EPA is more of a helping figure, but also kind of administering at the same time. CEQ is more of like a judicial body. EPA is more of a aiding body. The CEQ is a part of the executive office, as I said before, giving recommendations to the president about the state of the environment and its observations. So this is a council says what giving recommendations to the president. I don't know how much the president listens, but sometimes they do. I don't know. CEQ advises federal agencies, issues NEPA compliance, does not review specific NEPA documents, though. That's, I think, more on the EPA's end. Actually, this is our first question of the day. So, funsies, we got a question. I am currently not entirely certain what's the difference, the hard difference between NEPA, or the CEQ and EPA. And I'll write these down. Oh, no. There's a lot of stuff in here. I flipped through like 11 pages, and I'm not even through the first one reading this. So, we're going to write down questions. Maybe I can make a follow-up video. I don't know. Who knows? So, question number 1. I was saying the CEQ is a judicial figure, while... the CEQ is, I'm writing right now, is a judicial figure, while the EPA is an aiding figure. I'm going to put in a quotation marks, aiding figure, question mark. What are the hard differences? Cool, we got our first question. This means I'm actually having a use of my time. Obviously, I could have just looked this up, but I feel like, my professor wants questions. I feel bad for him. I'll just actually look it up on my phone real quick to see if it's just like what ChatGPT gives me. CEQ. I'm gonna see what the internet gives me. Just to see if I don't need to ask a question. Yeah, it says the CEQ is the CEQ is an advisory body, as I said. The EPA, on the other hand, is responsible for protecting human health through the environment. That's a bit broad, though. So I'm asking for the one I'm asking my professor is more specific actions. That's what AI can't give me. I need specific actions, specific cases that are relevant to this issue, and I'll put a little, little, little bullet point. Specific differences. That's my bullet point. All right. All right. We're 15 minutes in. I have only like 40 minutes of Minecraft footage, maybe an hour. I don't know. I don't know if I'm gonna. I might have to transition to Mario Kart footage later on because I have just backdrops of a bunch of random crap in my computer. Okay. I might reuse some Mario Kart footage. Maybe not. Where am I? Okay. Oh, I just finished the first page. Hooray! All right. This is about CEQ NEPA regulations. Jimmy Carter gave the CEQ the authority to issue binding regulations. So now it's a little bit more than just, procedural authority. A little more than just a procedural requirements. Some more juice, some more binding regulations. CEQ NEPA regulations are considered a set of uniform mandating regulations. These regulations are, however, broad and outdated because this was like the late 70s. There are general guidance and reports that concern NEPA implementation. The CEQ creates annual environmental quality reports, also published the significant 40 questions. So this is just a thing that they made. I have not read that yet. I should probably read that. The EPA is responsible for the following: filing and noticing, reviewing roles. So the reviewing role. Oh wait, this is the EPA. Oh wait. Maybe I didn't have to write the question down. So I'm actually reading this. Yeah, they're responsible for filing and noticing. They're a reviewing role. Sometimes they also review EAs too, but they generally review EISs. They're a cooperating agency role, so they participate with the NEPA process with other programs and agencies. That's what EPA. So they are like more of an aiding figure. I guess what my question still is though is like, what have they like specifically done? So I'll come back about that. NEPA does not apply to the branches of government and just some actions. Most NEPA successes partially can be attributed to hiring more people who are NEPA specialists. So yay, you should hire more people, go figure. Sometimes NEPA practitioners help update an agency's regulations. Each agency's NEPA regulations are listed in Appendix S. I have not read Appendix XS. Contents of these agencies include a criteria for what qualifies as an environmental assessment, an EIS, policies for private assistance, procedures for compliance, explanation for an external position. Okay, now we're a lead agency, which is important in the NEPA process, is determined for a specific criteria of NEPA and is mainly responsible for NEPA for that action when multiple parties are involved. So when there's like a federal action, they need to choose one main lead agency to do everything. And that is called the lead agency. I remember when I read the textbook, I read it as lead agency because I'm stupid. And I'm like, why are we calling it the lead agency? Why is this? Are we like trying to avoid lead in our water or something? I was so confused. But anyways, when there is more than one agency involved, this is when a federal agency is decided. This is based upon who is more important. And any disputes can go to CEQ. Although my professor noted that most of the time, this does not happen. Because agencies don't want to get in trouble with the president. Because if the dispute goes to CEQ, then the president hears it in the federal office board meeting. And then they're just like, why are we talking about this? A cooperating agency is the other one, or ones. So if there's multiple agencies involved, the lead agency is the main one. The cooperating agencies are the ones that are not the lead agency. Sometimes local, state, or tribal agencies can be cooperating agencies officially, and the lead agency can invite cooperating agencies and sometimes that can be what I just said above. So essentially, they, especially more commonly, they can hire a contractor to help. That's something that happens a lot as a cooperating for the creation of the EIS document and a lot of these processes. Sometimes an environmental contractor. So like, and also this is more beneficial for the public sometimes because the public likes private better in the U.S. generally, and they don't trust the government as much, especially more recently. So that's important. That's something my professor noted. Disputes between lead and cooperating are to be resolved themselves. Yeah, that's what I said before. Actually, I have another question. I have another question for today. My question is, what can I was reading my notes and I was saying that a cooperating agency can be I was saying how, or my professor said how a cooperating agency can be another, I guess, can be like a contractor or something. However, my notes did not say that. So officially speaking, so that's the important part. Officially speaking, how is a contractor involved as a cooperating agency? So are these terms related, or do they just help? I wrote agency, terrible handwriting. Agent, I can't spell. Agency. Agency. How is a contractor involved as a cooperating agency, or are they just paid? Is there any importance to being considered a cooperating agency? Or TANS. I cannot spell. Oh my gosh. I'm like multitasking with talking and writing at the same time. So I'm like spelling horribly. So that's where my brain power is lacking right now. Is there any importance to being a third party cooperating agency if you are cooperating agency? Well, no, not an agency in this case. Cooperating figure. Officially, if you are just paid to do so. All right. And then also, I actually have question 3, and this came to my mind. Can state cooperating agencies, so something like Caltrans, like a transportation department in California, well, state, I'm just not going to write cooperating agencies. Can state agencies be the lead agency? How does cooperation with state agencies work? And whose laws are abided by first? Because is it the state laws or is it the federal laws? Because sometimes they do overlap, especially in California. Whose laws are considered first? So sorry, I am writing this down. I don't know if anyone's going to watch this far. That'd be kind of interesting if you're actually paying attention. Sorry for those spaces of me not talking while I'm writing, but I can't really do much about that. I mean, I guess I could cut it out, but I don't want to do that. I don't care enough. You don't care enough. You're turning this on while you're eating popcorn. I know it. You're leaving this on autoplay while you're watching on like Roku TV. On my longer form videos, my most common OS is Roku TV. That means people are just leaving on autoplay. I know it. That, and then it's that in like Xbox and PlayStation and like Nintendo Switch. You're just gaming. Like YouTube TV apps are just, you're not actually watching it. Anyways. And also, can it ever be a mix? So we have a lot of questions here already. That's great. Great. All right. So Yes, disputes for development. So, cooperating agencies can call an EIS invalid or delay it due to a lack of due to a lack of info finalized in the EIS that was given by them. So the cooperation be like, hey, you didn't do enough. CEQ can informally give recommendations. Try to involve other parties for public involvement in the NEPA process, when possible. So try to do something called comments, which is that's very important later. The public can request information when not available. So if you're like, hey, I want information, you can be like, I demand information, actually. I demand information. Chapter 2, deciding if NEPA applies. We are moving on. Phase 1. Does NEPA apply? Phase 2, the draft phase. Phase 3, preparing the EIS or the FONSI. Preliminary environmental screening helps an agency understand environmental factors before creating their plan, avoiding severe delays. NEPA does not apply at the proposal stage. Which this is, so when you're being like, I want to build a highway across a polar bear reserve, NEPA does not apply. You can be not environmentally considerate at this point in time, which I don't know. This included Scientists for Public Info versus AEC, where they said that their research and development phase qualified as a proposal. Oh, so that's just a state. And earlier in my notes, I wrote down these court decisions, but then I stopped later on because it kind of got redundant. So you're going to stop hearing this. In CLEP versus Sierra Club, mere contemplation of an action does not need an EIS. I wonder what it means for an... I'm not going to write this as a question, but I was more jokingly asking, what does it mean for an agency to contemplate a proposal? It's like one person. It's probably just like, oh yeah, they talked about it informally. Formal agency advice does not need NEPA. Congress is not restricted by NEPA, but requests to Congress that is significantly backed by NEPA is. So Congress, the NEPA does not apply to the legislative branch of the United States, but any like federal projects that involving Congress, that NEPA does apply there. So if they're passing something that's involves the executive branch, it's federal agency technicals, then it applies. Activities that are subject to NEPA policies under like the available public. What is the APA? That's just an acronym. I know I can look that up. Let's look up. What is the APA? I wrote it down somewhere. APA Act. What is it? Administrative Procedure Act. United States federal statute that governs in a way in which administrative agencies of the federal government of the United States may propose and establish regulations. Oh God, that's complicated. Cool. Yeah, policies under anything under the APA. Plans, programs, projects. What are ministerial versus discretionary? So what is the difference between this meaning I just made up? Well, I didn't make it up. It's just legal jargon. If the agency can exercise a discretion, that is the difference between ministerial and discretionary. So if they can exercise a discretion. Now, what does that mean? I guess ministerial is like more formally, while discretion is like, it's like what you're doing. I might need to write a question about this. I'll keep it in my mind because I don't really know. I feel like an idiot if I just be like, oh, what does this random legal jargon mean? Acquisition of land is not under NEPA, so that doesn't count. Cool. Inaction is considered under NEPA, but if a federal agency never even considers an action, then that is not subject to NEPA. Inaction is when an agency reviews a proposal, then rejects it, and moves on. Cool. That's fun, like legally what inaction is considered. Connected actions are to be considered under NEPA. Sometimes connected actions are to be considered under the same NEPA document. These are interrelated or unwise to separate types documents. Connected, that's what a connected action is. So you can't, I guess, build a highway and then be like, oh, I need to make an exit for the highway to be useful. Of course that's connected. So I guess kind of what that means. Small federal handle situations are those that apply NEPA to just the small portion of federal oversight to a greater non-federal project. So if there's something like more privatized and there's a small federal portion, NEPA does not apply to private. So if you're a private land and you're doing what you need to do, that's more external like that. I think that the EPA kind of manages with that. But in terms of federal actions, the federal government is more directly involved with their own actions in an environmental consideration. So even if there's a small federal handle, quote unquote, then that NEPA applies. Budget requests, agency reports to Congress, and law enforcement / investigative activities are also not subject to NEPA. Cool. That's law enforcement investigative activities. That's interesting. Budget request. I don't know why budget. Well, I guess budget requests is like that's more Congress. CEs/CATEX, which is a categorical exclusion. So this is a new thing. Are implemented to bypass NEPA for efficiency when actions are routine or minor. And this is, as such, an agency may still implement an environmental assessment just to be safe, though, and no public notice when a category exclusion is applied. And sometimes many environmental assessments or memorandums to explain that it is a categorical exclusion are initiated. And just more further information on what a categorical exclusion is. Sometimes, like, this is a good example my professor made. You have a high occupancy lane in a highway, and you're trying to make it more of a toll lane. That is a categorical exclusion, because if you do it multiple times, you know that changing the lane to be more of the make it less volume, that the environmental impacts of that is actually, if anything, positive, because there's less cars. So if you do it more and more times over and over again, then it's not that big of a deal. Extraordinary circumstances, quote unquote, are exceptions where a CE or a categorical exclusion cannot apply. So extraordinary circumstances categorical exclusion cannot apply. Under extraordinary circumstances where an agency does not do a categorical exclusion, they must provide documentation as to why. Wait, why is this important? It does not do a categorical exclusion. Why would you need to explain it? I think I wrote that down wrong. I think it's something like along the lines where they did do a categorical exclusion under extraordinary circumstances. They need to explain why. Because you can always explain why. If there's an explanation, then it can go under judicial review, and then you're safe. And that goes for everything. Sometimes Congress can explicitly exempt NEPA, but the Congress has to do that. And there are no implied exceptions just because an agency does not over environmental protection. I don't know what I'm trying to say there. Sometimes your notes are illegible. Great. Now going back to ministerial versus discretionary, is there? That's still in my head. I'm gonna write that. I might not actually ask it in class because I feel a little self-conscious and asking some weird legal difference. But sure. Question 4. Is there an importance? Is there an importance between ministerial versus discretionary? And what is this difference in the NEPA process? And what is this difference? Again, sorry, I might not ask this, but I'm writing it down just for the sake of writing it down. I do not fully understand why I wrote down this point. And maybe someone else will kind of mention it. Hooray! All right. Sometime. Oh, wait, I already read that. Sorry. Chapter 2 continued. NEPA can yield to other laws due to the phrase "to the fullest extent possible." So if there's some other law that overlaps, then that's where this applies. NEPA versus the Endangered Species Act, Sometimes critical habitats depend and can fight the NEPA process. Emergencies are also exceptions, and some agencies have their own agencies. A fun fact, Trump said there was an energy emergency to have NEPA not apply. Go figure. There was no energy emergency. There is no documentation that actually happened. He just said that because he's the president. Sometimes is exempt under a functional equivalency. Sometimes NEPA is exempt under a functional equivalency. So, if there's something that's basically, already doing something that's basically an environmental review, then we don't need to do it. I don't know any examples of that. Yeah, much of the EPA is exempt because that is an environment. Why would the EPA's actions, that is the entire point of them existing, is for the environment. Why would they need to do like an additional environmental assessment when their entire job is environmental assessment? Still must consider environmental impact though. NEPA does not apply to other nations, but does apply to American activity in the global commons like Antarctica. So that's interesting. Under cases for national security, information can be withheld. So something my professor gave for this example is if you have, like, you can't get information for Native American burial grounds because then grave diggers might come by. Weird example. Chapter 3, Environmental Assessments and Funsies. And first, the threshold decision. Phase 2 being environmental assessment versus an EIS. Separation of an environmental assessment, which could lead to an EIS. Or not separation. Preparation. I'm like, what does that mean? The threshold decision is basically when you're preparing an environmental assessment and then you'll be like, oh crap, I actually need to upgrade this and make it in full-blown EIS. Because an EIS is more work, more harder, more detailed, more better of an environmental assessment than an EA is. It's more in-depth, all that fun stuff. Briefly describes probable impacts and provides alternatives, lists agencies and persons consulted. And this shows that these people's texts, I don't know what that says. Okay. Provides all documentation. Technically, no page limit is in a environmental assessment, but CEQ has advised agencies to keep EAs between 10 to 15 pages, use references for briefity purposes. Despite this, EAs are typically much longer, especially when used to justify a FUNSI. So maybe the conservatives are right that we need to make it more efficient, because they are typically not that short. Although usually the reason why is because we're not good at hiring people who are actually good at talking to the public in a brief manner. Because the point of NEPA is for the public to know. The point of NEPA is for discretionary purposes. It is not to talk science. That is a really big thing. And if we were to hire better people at talking more easy, I guess, or easier to understand to the general public, then it would be a lot probably easier for this process. But those types of people are actually not that common. Fun fact. if you get into the science, then you're gonna talk all sciencey, all jargony, because that's what you understand. That's what you taught yourself to understand. So interesting phenomenon going on there. Scoping is, I talk about this much more later, but it is something that agencies do, and it finds any kind of alternatives that they need to look into more. I'll go into that more. That's like a public process that is used for comments and whatnot. The intensity of an impact criteria, and does it meet quote unquote significant? This is what is to be considered significant for to be considered a significant impact that might induce a EIS. Beneficial effects, public health, unique characteristics of the geographical area, degree of controversy, degree of unknown risk, precedent setting effects, cumulative effects, cumulative effects is really interesting. It is done to prohibit separating into smaller effects that is not seem significant. So you can't say, oh, I want to build a highway, and I'm only building one lane. I'm only building one lane 8 times, though. Like, no, it is an 8-lane highway. Stop trying to be cheesy about that. Special species status and violation of environmental protection laws. Actually, cumulative effects should produce an EIS with it. Yeah, anytime there's a cumulative effect that you need to produce an EIS, like basically immediately. So significance can then be measured in accordance with its sensitivity. So if it's very sensitive, then it is, even if it is not that significant, just because it's sensitive, it is more significant. And also by creating pre-existing standards to compare yourself to. And this is all based on the agency's discretionary measures. Remote and speculative effects are outside the scope of NEPA, so you can't be like, oh, maybe this will happen. No, it won't. Human environment also includes built environment, including traffic, agency resources, etc. So that's just interesting. You actually have to consider the built environment, even like, oh, maybe this affects traffic, which is really kind of interesting because it's like, when you think of the environment, you think of like, oh, the like the trees and stuff. But actually going to be like, oh, how humans are infected, because humans are part of the environment. So like, oh, it's like humans are also having a worse time. You have to consider people too. People are animals. You're disturbing our ways of life of commuting by car by doing this federal agency action, just in the same way that birds are being disturbed or killed by flying into windows. I don't know. Chapter 3 continues. So this is the next page. Economic and social effects are not included for an EIS or an EA, but except when they are related to natural or physical environments. Psychological effects, and this is in continuation, psychological effects are not considered as they are too subjective, especially more recently. This has been more thrown out. FONSIs are public review documents that succinctly conclude with evidence from the environmental assessment that there is no finding of significant impact. And it then requires 30 days for public review. If you say there's no significant impact, then there's 30 days of public review for any case that's unusual or different or major. And sometimes there are theoretical mitigated FONSIs, and a mitigated FONSI is done because it's cheaper, has no standards, and it uses recommendations to avoid greater significance. So I have some questions here. What is a mitigated FONSI specifically? Why would you incorporate well, I know why you incorporate a mitigated FONSI, but I thought a FONSI was just a statement. So what is a mitigated FONSI? No, I don't want to. That's too many pages in the future. Oh, we're actually not. We're like halfway through the document. It's like 40 minutes in. Question 5. I'm just going to write mitigated FONSIs. Alright. And I'm trying to see if there's any more stuff that I want to consider. No, I think for now this is good. Yeah, the mitigated FONSI was a little random, but please talk about mitigated FONSIs. Alright, chapter 4. An environmental impact statement is useful as a disclosure device, a problem-solving tool, a consensus-building opportunity, and an information source. So that's kind of what I was saying before in chapter 1. Project-specific EIS, an individual undertaking, is the most common. A programmatic EIS, which is used for a broad federal action, useful for integrating, which a programmatic EIS is used for integrating environmental considerations into agency policy and making and planning, and more generic and conceptual. So there's project specific, there's programmatic, and then there's programmatic, which is more, like more bureaucratic, I want to say, and then legislative, which is the judicial one, which this is just regards to legislation and kind of in EIS that's poking the back of the bear of the judicial branch. I guess that's what's going on here. That can happen, and that's just, this isn't like official stuff. This is just how the book is splitting up EISs. And chapter 4 is about EIS. This is what I'm talking about here. An EIS to be prepared by the lead agency or contractor on behalf, and applicants cannot contribute. So this is what I was talking about before. Can they work as a cooperating agency? That was a question I was asking before. Contractors often used as they are seen as more objective. I said that before. State agencies sometimes prepare an EIS for jointly funded transportation projects. And this was what I was talking about with Caltrans, but then I was mentioning how is if there's a state and a federal government, then how do the laws overlap? Is it the state take precedent? Does the federal take precedent? Do they sometimes conjoin on discretionary measures? Projects typically take longer than 12 months. Actually, in class he was like showing how it typically takes around like 2 to 3 years, which is insane. A note of intent, or an NOI, an official legal notice that an agency is preparing an EIS. That's not very important. Yay, hey, I'm starting an EIS. Go figure. All right. Scoping. This is what I briefly mentioned this before, but now it's more important. Scoping is where the agency tries to understand public opinion, connected action, similar, or cumulative. And this is for the draft. Scoping is for the purposes of the draft, and this is an important thing because this is when I was mentioning in the beginning how public is very important to the NEPA process. This is the most fundamental part of that. Proposed action and alternatives, impacts, process, mitigation. That's the NEPA checklist. And there are also comments in the scoping process, providing insight as to how well an EIS is by public opinion, and can even shut down proposals in extreme cases. Don't know in a case where this has actually happened, but theoretically that can happen. And another thing is that NEPA requires the lead agency to request comments from others. So this is a requirement. The scoping is almost a requirement. Prepare the final EIS, reflect on the comments, and then create a record of decision, or ROD, which is a written public record. It is a written public record explaining why the agency did what they did. And finally, if there is no significant new information or changes, the agency is required to make if there is significant new information or changes, the agency is required to make a supplemental EIS. And this is a mere passage of time. A mere passage of time does not necessitate a supplemental EIS, however. A mere passage of time is 3 years. 3 years. This is something my professor said. If you don't work on a project for 3 years, then you have to just completely restart the EIS process. I didn't even write that down. I just remember that. An unexplored alternative may necessitate a supplemental EIS, however. And when making supplements, treat it as the same as normal, but without scoping and the NOI. And this is another question. What if you're making a supplemental EIS to require response from the comments? Sorry. So let's just write down what I'm trying to say here. So question 6. You're responding. You made a supplemental EIS. Or not EIS, yeah. A supplemental EIS. It is a supplemental EIS. Can there be comments to that EIS? There be more comments. Can there be more comments and require another? Requiring another EI or another supplemental EIS. And question 7 actually related to this. Do they just have to redo the portion of relation to the comments given in a supplemental? Yeah. Do they just have to redo the portion of relation to the comments given in a supplemental case? That is kind of a badly worded question, but it's fine. So when you're giving comments, how does this full process relate? All right. Chapter 5, Scope and Content. This is about another page long. This is the proposal and need. This is the proposed action. These are the alternatives, which are included even if potentially feasible. Even if potentially feasible, not just limited to measures that only the agency itself can adopt, and does not need to be exhaustive. So this is alternatives. These are potentially, what else could we do, essentially. How many alternatives that is dictated by the purpose and need. So the purpose and need of like, oh, why are we doing this? What is the thing going on here? And then the alternatives is being like, okay, well, what is the shadow realm of what's going on here? Agency is allowed to have a preferred alternative not stated, and it cannot be biased towards that alternative, however. So, must include an evaluation of the no action alternative. So, like, if you just don't do it, then what will happen? Should include the environmentally preferred action. Oh, now more recently it's become the preferred action, socially preferred action. Must include eliminated alternatives with brief reasons why you eliminated them. Compare this to the baseline alternative, which the baseline is the effects now as a fixed effect, while no action can change with time. So baseline is what's happening right now, and then pretend that never changes. The no action alternative is that you do nothing, but that can change with time. And then the alternative is what you actually implement that also changes with time. So theoretically, in most cases, the no action alternative is like kind of in between the baseline and the like actual like implementation or like risk mitigation measures. So, yes. Although there can be cases where they are reversed, because sometimes it's usually since it like, yeah, the baseline action's usually in between. And like if you did nothing, sometimes, well, no, it all depends. It all depends. Baseline, nothing changes. No action, it does change. That's the case here. Also state why they used a certain state why they used a certain baseline date. Strike a balance between quantitative, and which can, well, though quantitative can provide false security, and qualitative in a report. So qualitative is more personality. Although if you rely on quantitative, then that can provide false security. Be like, oh, that's what the facts say. No, it doesn't always say that way. Types of cumulative effects: time crowding. The frick is that? Crowding. Time crowding. Harvesting rate is great, which being greater than the regrowth rate. Wait, what? Oh, this is just talking about cumulative effects. So what's this? Okay. So a cumulative effect can include if you're like harvesting more than you regrow, which is over time, that's cumulative. Time lags. So this is exposure to carcinogens. So if you're like, oh, at this time you're exposed to some, and then you're exposed to more and more, and that all accumulates. So you can't just consider the one time you're exposed. You have to consider all the times you're exposed. Spatial density, which is spatial crowding effects. So if there's too much of carcinogens in one area, you can't just consider a little bit of the carcinogens in one area. You have to consider all of them. Cross boundary. So like, oh, if you have enough CO2, and that might consider acid rain in a different state over there. Fragmentation, urban segregation, so like highways, that's considered both sides of the highway. Compounding effects, so pesticides synergizing. So like if you have a pesticide, like making new chemicals and creating all weird bio effects there. Indirect effects, so like commercial development from a highway. And then triggers and thresholds, so like, oh, there's global climate change. It could trigger this greater phenomenon that's even worse. Questionnaires, checklists, matrices. What? Network/system diagrams, modeling, trend analysis, overlay mapping, and GIS. That's all these types of things that can be used for the scope and content as terms of measuring something quantitatively. because scientists okay, there we go. Be scientific with benchmarks, say conflicts with land management, beneficial effects. Define specific effects through the scoping process. So what's going on here? When someone asks, "Oh, what's going on here?" Be specific about it. They're like, "Oh, this is what's going on here." An EIS must explain irreversible environmental impacts. I say that before, but I think that's kind of important. If you kill off a species, I would like to know. Global effects are ultimately unmeasurable, but people try to push to consider them. Yeah, global effects, that's a weird one. Ultimately, that's kind of in like the category of like beyond your practically measurable stuff. The scope and content of an EIS needs to practice environmental justice, which this is interesting. Environmental justice is the effect on middle and low income people. So this is like a more social justice type of thing. So typically, like, black populations live shorter. And this is a large part due to a lot of black communities being in environmentally more hazardous areas, and they're exposed to all these bad effects. Which that's a big environmental justice issue right there. Obviously, low income also, but land's cheaper where it's might make you cough a little more. That's kind of a bit iffy. We don't like that, although some people do. Include mitigation measures. Feasibility, specificity, mitigation, and adequacy. What the heck? No, mitigation. Okay, mitigation adequacy. I thought adequacy was like a bullet point, but the A was a bullet point. No, it's adequacy. So include the mitigation measures in your EIS. So what you use to mitigate the bad environmental effects. How feasible they are, how specific they are, and how adequate they are. Sections. There are producers, there are preparers, agencies, and organizations. Appendices, indexes addressing. If comments are minor, then they can address them by just writing them on a rate sheet. Cool. Be like, oh, this is actually something my professor said. It was like, oh, in the case of AI nowadays, we are able to we can just be like minor comments. We can just use an AI to respond to, or like people are just kind of trolling. The EIS should not be post hoc rationalization, which what this means is that they shouldn't be like, oh, I want to, I already made a proposed action, and let me just try to justify it. That's an important thing to understand. I think that goes beyond the EIS. Sometimes I'm like, I have a video idea for Yataksha, and then I'm like, it's kind of a bad idea, but then I just try to justify it in my head. That's post ad hoc. Interesting. No, not post ad hoc. A post hoc. Maybe it is post ad hoc. I think maybe. I don't know. And EIS should be encouraged to tier their EISs because it avoids redundancy. And tiering is when you have, you say you have the national level, the effects, and then you have the effects on a specific state, and maybe the effects on a specific county. So it's tiering. And these are in the main document referring to supplemental sections instead of repeating the same information. So this is a time-saving measure. When costs or resources are unavailable or unreasonable, they must summarize with what is available and state info that is unavailable. So be clear with what is going on here. Chapter 6, integrating NEPA with other laws. So find creative ways to integrate environmental laws in the most efficient way possible. Under the 10-step approach, there's a 10-step approach of creative ways to integrate environmental laws in the most efficient way possible. 1, preliminary constraint analysis. This is the purpose, project description, preliminary site evaluation, which is seeking damages to avoid delays. A list needed of permits and regulation requirements. What does this project involve? So it's like, okay, what are we doing here first? So this preliminary, be like, okay, what do we need to do first? Number 2, Consult regulatory agencies. Keep proposals broad enough for changes to be able to be realistically implemented. So we can't just do random crap here. We got to be like, let's consult the regulatory bodies first to make sure that we don't have conflict with them. So these are like kind of consulting things first and making sure that we don't waste our time later. 3, prepare comprehensive review strategy. Find a common ground among agencies and formalize commitment to the environmental requirements. A master schedule to establish priorities. So this is just the ultimatum of what I said before. 4, memorandum of understanding formalizes involvement. So this is documenting what I said before, and also everyone involved, and also everyone that's doing everything here. 5, conduct reviews and technical studies, at least meeting protocol requirements of other agencies. 6, consolidate results, disclose conflicting views, and the lead agency shall try to settle disputes in a problem-solving manner. So anything that it's like, oh, 2 agencies are disputing me, they need to solve it, and can go ahead even before processing, which is weird, and this is an efficiency thing. So even before they process these disputes, the agency can start what they think they need to do. Public and interagency review. This can be valuable in the scoping process. So this is now that these people are starting to consolidate the results and they've conducted review in their technical studies, now we have the public and other people coming in. And I'll include additional studies, include newly acquired info. If changes significant, conclude new document review, conduct. I just said a mosh pot of words. Adopts consolidated NEPA documents. So once all that is done, can be done, it is done. Again, I think that was just a soup of words. Ensure this NEPA document is used in their regulatory decisions. So now that we've done all the NEPA stuff, now it can be applied to future cases and new precedents that this document has set, because it's a multi-year process and it is very important. Now, some common failure points: common compliance at the last minute, ignoring requirements, didn't consult people, timing conflicts between agencies, staffing challenges. Oh no, you didn't hire enough people. Wonder why. Non-cooperation between agencies. They're like, no, I don't like you. They may have to cooperate with local or state laws, which this was again one of the questions I asked before, which with even their own EIA laws, and become familiar with the local state laws, but maybe trigger with federal laws, and identify inconsistencies and how that can be reconciled. But which one is supreme? That was my question. You might think it's federal, but I think something he mentioned that was state, which is weird. The Endangered Species Act. Cooperate with it by identifying any ways a person can take from an endangered species, submit a consultation for biological assessment, give back a biological opinion, could give back a jeopardy opinion, along with recommendations. Clean Water Act, Rivers and Harbors Act, and this is just comply with the permit. And these are just a list of environmental laws that you need to comply with. National Historic Preservation Act, identify historic properties, asset effects, consultation by trying to reduce adverse effects, council commitment to the Historic Preservation Act, and by ACHD you can proceed once you have all these consultations. Clean Air Act, conformity requirements, comply to the Clean Air Act, plus may have to comply with specific executive orders, like there's a national emergency, oh no, and analyze, address, and provide community input for environmental justice. And EPA and NEPA analyze environmental effects and make sure low income have access to disclosed info. Environmental justice is an office of the EPA, fun fact. So that's cool. Chapter 7, we're skipping chapter 7 because that chapter is really useless. It's about using the internet, but the book is kind of old and the internet has evolved massively, so all the information is irrelevant. Chapter 8, this is decision making. Reference are made from other agencies when the local agency cannot be resolved with directly. Okay. So this is kind of like the contracting people. These referends are then directed to CEQ, and they mediate. They mediate often towards the environment, obviously, and sometimes shut down proposals or let agencies figure it out. So referend is just be like, I'm having a problem, throw it to the CEQ. The ROD, or the record of decision, represents the final decision and is judicially enforceable. So whatever you say in the ROD, that's what the laws can screw you up with. The CEQ also recommends extensive monitoring to ensure effectiveness of all the stuff that we just talked about. Chapter 9. The chapters are much, much shorter now. NEPA, chapter 9 is the longest one left. NEPA judicial review. And early courts predicated to liberal standing for NEPA. The plaintiff, which is the person involved in a legal case. Bad independence, follow NEPA, follow CEQ recommendations, require good faith of effort. Administrative Procedures Act. Oh, they actually mentioned what the APA was. I just wrote APA, but previous in my notes. Allows citizens to challenge governmental decisions. The plaintiff must have standing to sue. All right. Exhaustive other administrative amenities before suing, and must be ripe to order. No action can be sued for something that's already resolved. That's called a moot. Laches. It's called something for unreasonably delaying environmental action. It's called a laches. So moot, something that's already resolved. Laches, unreasonably delaying. There's two terms there. That's more legal terms, though. A recorded NEPA document that judicial... my handwriting gets like worse and worse and worse. A recorded NEPA document to address... I don't even know. Included, maybe? That included something. I don't know. I said something. To address the issue has reason to sue. Okay, I don't know what I said. Seeking injunction, enjoin project. Yes, that is a word. Enjoin project activists. So this is another question, actually. What are the details of the legal process when you... I'm just going to write question 8. Enjoin/injunction in legal authorization process. I didn't really write enough here. I just wrote what it was, and because I started getting sick of doing it. So we'll ask the professor instead. If he wants me to read a textbook of like 200 pages in a week, then he will get questions. Station. What is this, and is it important? Is it important? All right. Oh, we're almost done here. All right. Well, actually, no, we're not. Done the book here. They need a standard of review to fight against arbitrary and capricious. The hard look doctrine mandates that is like you need to take a good look at what you're doing here, which is for judicial cases. They have to have a rule of reason. Yes, this is just basic judicial things. The scope of the content determines whether the federal agency considered environmental consequence. So this is important for the scoping process. Even though procedural, the agency needs to commit to environmental mitigation, because that's the whole point of what's going on here. Chapter 10, this is really short. U.S. aid is subject to NEPA, go figure. Rio Declaration on Environmental Development is a thing that exists. The problem with Chapter 10 is it's also kind of outdated, so I didn't write much here. Chapter 11, some NEPA documents too much. Some NEPA things document too much on documentation, then results. Overemphasize science, and this is part of a lack of political will. It costs too much and takes too long to do a proper... by the way, this is like criticisms of NEPA. And also has made the public... this is a good thing, though. This has made public more conscious of environmental issues, which I mentioned earlier. All right, now we're in the lecture notes. These are more recent and much more. I'm going to go through these a little faster. There are things that have insignificant environmental pretone, like a MARTA extension. You need to know that you qualified for a categorical exclusion. You must raise your concerns during the draft process. Agency responsibilities is that these regs have been vacated recently and now go to themselves instead of the courts, which is as important with the Chevron doctrine. A regular FONSI often have some form of mitigation. This is a question I asked, actually. An agency decides what is significant, obviously. A local agency can cooperate with state and SECA, which is California, and has even more significant requirements, but federal is in charge with both. A memorandum is significant for understanding. Consultation, which other agencies must abide to the help requested. Scoping. This is what I mentioned before. Determine what is significant and insignificant. When something is insignificant, just explain why and you're done. Identify consultation or consultation requirements. A project should be considered in its entirety. Alternatives. This is the heart of the document, although my professor didn't entirely agree with that, but he said it anyways. Agencies must decide the reasonable range of alternatives. Cumulative impacts have been removed recently. Go figure. Although they might not. They might come back. Feasibility, practicable, being economic, technical, logistic, and they also need stability. That's the point of cumulative impacts. Compliance with other regulations. Identify all permits you can get and comply with all other related requirements. The hierarchy of rules. NEPA, CEQ regulations, then environmental agencies, then executive orders, then agency cumulative documents. So there's a hierarchy. NEPA is first. Courts can now state whether they think something is appropriate, not reasonable. So this is important so they can have a little bit more authority here. So they used to be able to say, oh, that's not reasonable, but now they have a little bit more saying power in the environmental process, being like, hey, you can't do that, actually. So a little bit more wagging power. Purpose and needs is something that exists. I just wrote that down, sure. Decision makers are a combination of the federal agency and involved companies, and you also need a statement of purpose. Judges can weigh in for environmental consequences and preferred alternatives. Mitigation is avoiding, minimizing or control, rectifying, compensating, reducing or eliminating, and life cycle and mitigation. Now, this is the next lecture. I only had 2 lectures here because the other ones were covered by what I previously said. Why we're changing the regulations right now. The agency's tasked with writing guidance, and we need EISs useful to decision makers. This is clear from lawsuits. Looking at US DOT and FWHA regulations and see how they can become either more specific or change. How do we decide on how projects are constructed? FHWA wants a single process for entire environmental review and makes it more consistent and easier. Decisions for the public interest, which is made for themselves, due to social and environmental impacts from neighborhoods, highways, bulldozing. The DOT funds mitigation measures, and these have added heavy considerations. No discriminations involved in the process from decisions made for the public interest. And decisions made by themselves cannot be arbitrary or capricious. The EISs can be subdivided by the government for this decision making for the public interest and need a categorical reason for removal, i.e., Wyoming has no noise. But that's not because it's Wyoming. That's because it's in the middle of nowhere. So you need to state why, they have a categorical reason based off some simple logic like that. It has to be everything has to have logic behind it. Any highway or transit by federal funding is a proposed action or joint/multiple use permits. Most projects in Georgia are like this. So any highway or transit by federal funding. That's what a proposed action is. So if we're making something here, it's a proposed action. Proposed actions need to be logical and have independent ability. So building to an edge of a wetland is arbitrary and capricious, and just because like saying, oh, well, we already built it and then we need to complete it. No, you need to think about how it is in the full design. So you need to be logical in your... That's what independent utility means. You need to be like everything. You can't just be like, oh, I I need to just like justify this other part. Like if you build up to a wetland and then stop building that, and that was your reason, I guess that has independent utility, but it actually, you don't want to be like, oh, I actually need to keep building. No. Class 1 in the FHWA laws can be considered significant. Class 2 is not of no significant, and Class 3 is uncertain. Class 1 has many processes and has with predetermined cases that need an EIS. No significant is no EA or EIS required, and uncertain is just an EA is required. Having an individual action as a categorical exclusion, and if the action is similar to something similar to a categorical exclusion, only done when they want to make a new categorical exclusion. So, an individual action, if you make, oh, I want this one thing to be a categorical exclusion, that's usually when you're just trying to make a new one. When you're doing this, you need to notify agencies early, notify the public, have a reasonable meeting spot with the public if you do this. So like, oh, if you want to meet in about something that is involved with the Northwest Corridor then of Atlanta, then you need to, maybe you have a meeting spot in Cobb County, so make it reasonable. Don't have it in Alaska. Major changes in knowledge warrant a supplemental EIS. So if there's like something new happens, be like, oh, we need to create a new EIS. And this is a question I have actually. Does a supplemental EIS start over from the very beginning or just that portion? Yeah, I think I already wrote that down because I have a question in here in my lecture notes. If no construction occurs for 3 years and a new EIS is required, I already said that. Sometimes Congress can exempt this if they put it into law. And fun fact, Congress was like, actually, accept this one case. That's something I haven't. Last page here. Yay. Although I'm going on going on something later. Mitigation commitments. These are settlements that you can have in the EIS, have in a record of decision, and have in the document slash contract. And these are insured promises. So if you have a commitment to mitigation, then you are ensuring this is a promise. And failure can lead to a lawsuit. What exactly is a memorandum of understanding, though? So if failure can lead to a lawsuit, however, put it in the memorandum of understanding is recommended when you have a mitigation commitment. So what is, oh, that's a question. Memorandum of understanding, question mark? MOA, question mark? That's the question. What the heck is it? Ensure that you will be in compliance with other laws. And this is interesting. Section 4F requirements. This is just a whole list of technical jargon. Wildlife refuges, historic sites, recreation lands, etc. The DOT Act of 1966 has been followed since these requirements, unless there are no alternatives with extensive mitigation or has a minimus impact, in which minimus means technically more than zero, but basically zero. So that's the only time when Section 4F requirements are not inflicted in this case. The agency makes this call, or the administration, and often if the impact is tried for and some results do cave, then the judge says, okay. So you can't kind of go around Section 4F. Feasible is like the CEQ regulations and provisional under economic, socially, and environmental reasons. So this is what I'm talking about with feasible. So feasible is if you can, I don't know what I'm talking about here. Feasible is like the CEQ regulations and provisional under economic, socially, environmental reasons. And sometimes sometimes an EIS/section for alternative is made. But yeah, feasible. Yeah, be feasible. And you have to be provisional with economic, social, environmental reasons overall. Section 4 must comply with NEPA. That's obvious. We have feasibility, which is the feasibility portion is 7 to 12 months. The preliminary design portion is around 3 months. The EIS is usually done by this part. Final design has contract drawings. Mitigation measures need to be implemented so they can be enforced for the final designs. And the construction, so that's around 6 to 24 months. 65% of the budget is in the construction phase around. Environmental monitoring and compliance. Startup, which is 10% of the budget, and that's basically being, does it work? And that takes around 12 months. And there's like another 10% of the budget, even afterwards, for just insurance purposes. And that's the end of my notes. Got a little confusing near the end there, because I think I got tired, but that's how this type of stuff works. But we are not done. As you can see by the length of the video, we are not done. There is one specific big chart I'm just going to read out here. No, you will not see on screen, but I'm just going to read it. So, let's pull this up. What the heck? Okay. What is this? We need lectures. So I'm pulling up a flow chart. No. Sorry, give me a second to find the flow chart. Nope, that's kind of a flow chart. That is a flow chart. NEPA does not require mitigation or good decisions, but must assess and disclose impacts. Yeah, and the 5 stages in project development: feasibility, preliminary design, final design, construction, and startup. The feasibility is the environmental assessment, so that's something that's in the whole scope of what we're actually designing here, just as a fun little thing. I'm trying to find the flow chart. Here's the flow chart. I found the flow chart. Cool. So you start with a proposed action, which I said is something that is made. It was like, oh yeah, most of Georgia stuff is a proposed action. Let me read the definition that I said again. What the heck? Here we go. Any highway or transit by federal funding. So that's the important part. If it is by federal funding, that's a proposed action. So if anything by federal funding is a proposed action. First, see, is it on an agency categorical exclusion list? And if yes, then you just ensure that the categorical exclusion is in fact correct, and there is no environmental impacts. And then you can see that it goes with agency action with conditions. And if there's any lawsuits, reconcile the lawsuits, and then go with agency action with conditions again. So that's categorical exclusion makes it pretty easy. But if there's no categorical exclusion, then you start a preliminary analysis / preliminary scoping. So you have a previous scoping measure in here. That's something important here. And you see that if this has a significant impact, if this scoping measure has a significant impact, and then, so if any of these measures in the scoping if it's something that's been identified through a preliminary scoping measure, is like, oh wait, is there a significant impact here, which is decided by the agency, And if there's no significant impact, does it qualify to be a categorical exclusion? And if it does, then you develop a new categorical exclusion and ensure that there's no environmental impacts, and then also make a record of decision with the conditions that are created, and then go back into agency action with those conditions that are applied. But if it does not qualify to be a categorical exclusion from the significant impact that you found, then you document a finding of no significant impact, which is part of the environmental assessment, which then that goes into the record of the decision. Now, if there is an insignificant impact from the preliminary analysis or scoping process, then you mitigate all impacts possible. That you try to do that, and if you can't, then you make a note of intent, so the NOI, and have a scoping process from a second scoping process in the of this big draft, a draft EIS, and have public comments and response to comments with the and have like probably a supplementary EIS, and then the final EIS with a record of decision with there. So if you have no ability to mitigate the effects, then you go through all that. Now, if you can have an ability to mitigate all the impacts, then have a finding of no significant impact. That is probably a mitigation FONSI. And then finally, if you have significant impacts, sometimes if it's kind of in between a yes or no, you make an environmental assessment. And if then that environmental assessment has no significant impacts, which is the in-between phase, then you make another, then in this case, you also make a finding of no significant impact. But however, if it does have significant impacts, then you have to, and then ensure if you can mitigate all the impacts, yes or no. And if you can't mitigate all the impacts from this environmental assessment, that you then have to go further and create the EIS. So that is the process of this whole situation. I am done this video now. I definitely have to record more footage for it. I'll probably just throw Mario Kart in here. It's fine, whatever. If you watched this far, you are probably on autoplay. I doubt anyone actually watched this far. Bye!